It was a chilly Friday morning on September 28, 2015, when a farmer and his neighbor were busy installing a drainage system in the field and saw something strange. They had no clue they were about to make an amazing discovery. Morning hours are usually perfect for getting hard work done. The air feels cool and fresh, and you still have plenty of energy. So, on this special Friday in 2015, James Brissell decided it was finally time to work on one of his soybean fields. He'd been planning to do it for some time, and that morning 2 of his friends stopped by to help out. Around 7:30 in the morning, they met at James' house and walked out to the field together with their backhoe. They were joking and laughing on their way there, already thinking about how great it would feel to relax once the drainage work was finished. But they had no idea their day was about to change completely. None of them could have imagined they were about to find something so unusual it would end up at the University of Michigan. As soon as they reached the field, they started digging the trench for the drainage pipe. About 20 minutes later, at 8 feet underground, James hit something solid with the backhoe. The machine groaned and shifted against whatever was buried deep below. He stopped and called out to Trent to come over. "Hey, Trent, there's something here. Come check this out," he shouted. The 2 men gathered around and began clearing away the dirt where James had struck the mysterious object. It was difficult to see through all the mud, but they could tell right away this thing was massive. At first, they thought it might be buried wood, maybe an old fence post that had gotten bent. "We didn't know what it was, but we knew it was certainly a lot bigger than a cow bone," Brissell said later, his voice still filled with wonder at the memory. But within just a few minutes they realized they were completely wrong. Soon they managed to dig up a huge bone, 3 feet long and unlike anything they'd ever seen. At first, it was still covered in dirt, so they weren't sure what it was. But once they cleaned it off a little, they realized it was a rib bone, and it was enormous. James stood there shocked, trying to understand that something this big had been buried under his field all this time. After a few moments, the surprise began to fade, and their curiosity took over. Trent even started laughing and joking around, claiming they'd discovered a dinosaur. He picked up the bone, ran around the field, and yelled, "Here comes the dinosaur! We found the dinosaur!" For a brief, magical moment, they dared to dream they had uncovered something from the age of giants. Well, it wasn't a dinosaur, but if it wasn't that, then what could it be? Not long after the men started shouting with excitement, James's young grandson heard all the commotion and came running down to the field to see what was happening. What happened next would be burned into James's memory forever. "When my 5-year-old grandson saw the hip bone, he just froze," James recalled, his voice soft with emotion. His mouth fell open and he couldn't stop staring. He was completely in awe. The sight of that little boy, standing speechless before this ancient mystery, somehow made the moment even more profound. The men still didn't know exactly what they'd discovered, but they were sure it was something special. At the time, they figured the rib bone was probably the only one buried there, but they were in for a huge surprise. There were many more bones still hidden underground, a lot more. Since they had no way of figuring it out by themselves, James and Trent decided to call the paleontology department at the University of Michigan. They knew this was bigger than anything they could handle, and they were right. Before long, a team of experts came to the field to investigate. Dan Fisher, a professor of paleontology and head of the university's Museum of Paleontology, came with the team. The moment they saw the rib, something changed in their faces. Their eyes widened, their voices fell silent. But instead of revealing what they knew, the scientists just stood there in eerie silence, staring at the bone as if they'd seen a ghost from the distant past. James and Trent exchanged nervous glances, confusion written across their faces. Minutes passed like hours, The tension was suffocating. They didn't say a word, and I thought they were just trying to figure out how it could have ended up in my field, James said, his voice betraying his growing anxiety. The scientists whispered among themselves, pointing at markings on the bone that only they could understand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dan slowly looked up from the bone. His face was pale, his voice barely above a whisper. I have an idea of what this might be, he said, his hands trembling slightly. But if I'm right, there should be more, much more. He paused, swallowing hard. We need to dig deeper. We need to know for sure. I told Dan they could dig, but I was honestly terrified they might be wrong, James admitted later. But I was even more terrified they might be right. The team got started immediately. They had just one day to uncover as much as they could before James needed to resume his drainage project and finish his harvest. Time was running out, and the pressure was intense. 15 staff members from the university rolled up their sleeves and got to work in the muddy field. They also brought in local help, a digger operator named James Bollinger. No one knew what they might find, and that made the whole thing feel like an adventure story. As they worked, the crew came up with all kinds of ideas about what the bones might be or what might happen to them. But one big question kept haunting them. How did these bones end up on James's farm in the first place? Word began to spread like wildfire through the small farming community. Curious neighbors started gathering at the edge of the field, their faces pressed with wonder and disbelief. Children pointed in amazement. Adults whispered theories, and elderly residents shared stories of strange things they'd found in their own fields decades ago. The discovery was becoming the talk of the entire area. The answer would soon shock them all. Then, in the heart of their desperate excavation, the earth revealed its most guarded secret. One of the workers suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed across the field. "Stop! Everyone stop!" Time seemed to freeze. Every shovel halted mid-swing. Every breath caught in throats. The worker stood motionless, staring down into the pit, his face drained of all color. Slowly, with a shaking finger, he pointed at something massive emerging from the ancient mud. A tusk. Not just any tusk, a colossal, curved ivory spear that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness below. The silence was deafening. Then, like a dam bursting, chaos erupted. "My God," Dan whispered, falling to his knees beside the excavation. "My God, it's really here." That moment changed everything forever. Now they were all certain there were more remains down there. Dan Fisher had been right all along, and the truth was more incredible than anyone had dared imagine. With new excitement mixed with terror, the whole team worked faster. Working from dawn to dusk without stopping to eat or drink, they raced against time. The weight of history pressed down on them with every shovelful of earth. James watched in stunned silence as his simple drainage project transformed into an archaeological miracle. Finally, Dan could no longer contain the earth-shattering revelation. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. He walked slowly toward James, his steps heavy with the burden of ancient secrets. Once they found the tusk, James remembered, Dan looked at me with tears in his eyes and said the words that would change everything. "James, these bones, they belong to a woolly mammoth." The words hung in the air like thunder. A mammoth, here in his field, a creature from the dawn of time, sleeping beneath his soybeans for over 15,000 years. But Dan had more shocking news to share, revelations that would send chills down their spines. His voice dropped to an ominous whisper. "This isn't just any mammoth," he said, his words carrying the weight of ancient mysteries. This appears to be a Jeffersonian mammoth, a rare hybrid between a woolly mammoth and a Columbian mammoth, named after Thomas Jefferson himself. He paused, letting the magnitude sink in. This animal was a giant among giants, Dan continued, his voice filled with awe and dread. A male in his 40s, standing 10 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing 9 tons, a true monster from the Ice Age. But the most chilling revelation was yet to come. Dan also shared that he hoped James would consider giving the discovery to the University of Michigan for research. The mammoth had lived between 11,700 and 15,000 years ago, potentially more than 1,000 years before the famous Clovis hunters arrived. He also suspected that ancient hunters might have killed it. There was even a mark on the rib that looked like it had been cut up for food. "We have excellent evidence of human activity here," Dan declared, his voice trembling with excitement. But then the men wondered out loud, if it had been hunted, why didn't they eat it? Why bury it instead of selling it or using it? None of them had the answer yet, but they were determined to find out. That's when Dan explained that ancient hunters might have put the mammoth in a pond to keep the meat fresh, an early way to preserve food. They may have cut up the carcass and stored parts of it at the bottom of a pond, he said, pointing to the boulders. These rocks could have been used to anchor their meat stash underwater. Meanwhile, the digging continued. The team kept working hard, hoping to find more pieces of the puzzle. After hours of digging through the soybean field, they finally uncovered something truly amazing. Along with the hip bone, they found a skull with 2 massive tusks, ribs, part of the backbone, and both shoulder blades. But that wasn't all. Scattered around the mammoth remains, they discovered 3 mysterious boulders, one the size of a medicine ball, one like a basketball, and another shaped like a football. There was no stream or natural way these rocks could have gotten here, Dan explained, his voice filled with excitement. Near one of the tusks, they also found a small stone flake that looked like it could have been used as a cutting tool. It was an unbelievable sight. Using zip lines attached to the backhoe, the team carefully hoisted the mammoth's gigantic skull and tusks from the muddy pit as daylight faded. Dan called it one of the top 10 most important discoveries ever made in Michigan. Even though they had recovered only about 20% of the skeleton, it was still in remarkable condition. The only major parts missing were the back legs, feet, and a few smaller bones. And the fact that they were able to recover so much of it in one piece meant scientists might learn more from this find than from any other mammoth remains they'd studied before. Though it looked like a woolly mammoth, Dan explained that the animal may not have actually been woolly. Based on the features, he believed it might be a Jeffersonian mammoth, a rare type thought to be a mix between woolly and Columbian mammoths. These types show traits from both species. No matter which type it was, one thing was clear. This was a rare and incredible find that could rewrite the history of human presence in North America. "If this evidence is confirmed," Dan said solemnly, "it would represent the earliest instance of human interaction with a mammoth in the eastern Great Lakes Basin." Word about the mammoth spread quickly around the area. Curious neighbors and visitors started showing up at James's farm to see the bones for themselves. "We've had people drive out from Battle Creek and Jackson," James shared in an interview. "They come into Chelsea, stop somewhere to ask for directions, and then head straight here." He added, "We've had teachers, kids, parents, and even grandparents come out. Just this morning, we had a man in hospice come by to see the bones. The reaction has been incredible. So, what happened to the mammoth skeleton in the end? James decided to donate it to the University of Michigan. The scientists returned in 2017 for a second dig, uncovering 40 more bones and pieces that had been missed in the rushed first excavation. "We got the kind of information we need to do the science right," Dan said with satisfaction. "The bones now rest in the University of Michigan Museum of Natural History, where people from around the world can come to marvel at this incredible discovery." But the story didn't end there. The discovery had touched lives in ways no one could have imagined. Nico Lorca was a college student studying German and evolutionary anthropology when she first heard about the bristle mammoth on the evening news. "I heard about it and thought, that is so cool. I would love to be part of that," she recalled, her eyes shining with passion. That single news report changed the course of her entire life. She added paleontology as a minor, graduated, and went to work in Fisher's lab, spending countless hours carefully repairing the very skull and tusks that had emerged from James's field. "The first bristle excavation is what inspired me to get into paleontology," she said, "and now I'm here." Yet for James Bristle, the mystery has never truly ended. Even today, years after that fateful September morning, he walks his fields with a different perspective. "A mammoth in my soybeans is the find of our lifetimes," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and haunting curiosity. "But even now, when I'm driving or walking across the field, I can't help but wonder, what else is down there?" And perhaps most mysteriously of all, nearly 10 years have passed since that earth-shaking discovery. The evidence appears compelling, the scientific analysis thorough, yet the full results of this potentially history-rewriting find remain locked away, unpublished in peer-reviewed journals. The question that haunts the scientific community echoes through the halls of academia. Why? What secrets does the bristle mammoth still guard? But there's another layer to this story that speaks to something deeper about human nature. In a world where such discoveries could have made James a wealthy man, he chose a different path. No fortune awaited him. No prestigious awards graced his mantle. No government honors bore his name. The bones that could have sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars on the private market were freely given to science. His only tangible reward? The mammoth now bears his name forever, the bristle mammoth, displayed in the University of Michigan's Museum of Natural History, where thousands of visitors marvel at his generosity as much as the ancient beast itself. He renamed his farm Mammoth Acres, a humble monument to the day everything changed. The viral video of the skull being hoisted from the earth has been watched nearly 1 million times, making James inadvertently famous across the globe. Yet, when asked about recognition, his voice carries no bitterness, only wonder. "A mammoth in my soybeans is the find of our lifetimes," he reflects, watching visitors still arrive at his farm years later, drawn by the magic of that September morning. Perhaps the greatest prize isn't gold or glory, but knowing that your moment of curiosity changed our understanding of the ancient world forever, and what other ancient mysteries might still be sleeping beneath our feet, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Did you enjoy this story? If you found something worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in your backyard, would you keep it and sell it, or give it away for free like James did? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.